This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Dave McDonald.
I'm Nate Blyton.
I'm Sam Merciers.
And this week we're pleased to be joined by an excellent pianist, Andy Lee. Andy's got a new CD coming out, and he's touring on this reconstruction of Dennis Johnson's new November, which we're really excited to talk to him about. Andy, thank you for being with us this morning.
Well, thank you for having me.
So November is, well, let's start here. For those that don't know November, which I would imagine is a lot of people, could you just explain to us what this work is and kind of its historical significance?
Okay, that might take as long as the piece, but
that's
I'll
fine.
shorten it.
It's a 5-hour work.
Yeah.
Let's try to maybe half hour.
Okay. Well, Dennis Johnson was friends with Lamont Young, of course, one of the original Minimalists, and was at UCLA with him. And purportedly, he wrote this piece called November around 1959 that was largely improvisatory. He had these small little musical ideas, sometimes chords, occasionally kind of a melodic thing, but never more than, let's say about 3 beats of an idea. And purportedly it was 6 hours long. And Lamont Young had told Kyle Gann, noted musicologist and composer himself, that this was the piece that inspired Lamont's well-tuned piano, his magnum opus, which of course developed over the course of the next couple of decades. Unfortunately, Dennis Johnson left music after 1962. I mean, basically just abandoned it entirely to pursue mathematics, and has never held at least to my knowledge, an academic position or anything like that, but has done a lot of important work and has obviously been able to sort of support himself doing independent mathematical research. So this piece basically just existed as sort of a story, or as others have called it, the Yeti of minimalism. What composers would tell their kids at night, if they were bad, they'd end up writing something like this.
What could be scarier than a 5-hour piano piece?
Right.
That has lost in the sands of time. Or
Yeah. The only thing that existed aside from the story and what Lamont said of this was this cassette reel tape, and there's 112 minutes of it, and that's it. And Kyle had always been interested in it, and only in the last 5-10 years or so has technology gotten to the point where he could really he could digitize it and really transcribe it, because it's warbly at points, the pitch will shift, and so it is kind of a nightmare to transcribe. And so that was sort of his first step in reconstructing the piece. And he was able to get a hold of Dennis Johnson, who's, I'm not sure exactly what the situation is, but I know his short-term memory is very bad now at this point. But he was able to have a conversation with him and get a hold of a score, and I'll put that in big quotes, because it was dated from, I'm forgetting, from much later. I think the 70s or so.
I think so. Gann actually wrote a really nice article about this in American Music in 2010. So if for those of you that subscribe to the journal American Music, if you go back into your archives, which are on your bookshelf next to Perspectives of New Music, it's the winter 2010 issue of American Music, and he says a few things in there that there are little notations that have different dates. So there are some from the 70s, but there are some as late as the 80s as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead, continue.
Oh yeah, no problem. Well, and if you don't happen to have access to American Music, if you just go to Kyle Gann's blog, Post Classic, and search Dennis Johnson November, he detailed this entire process, and he also let's say he borrowed heavily from the journal article for our liner notes, which are also available from our website. So yes, it appeared that Dennis still had some interest in the piece, and was kind of trying to reconstruct it himself somehow. But he stressed to Kyle over and over that that the recording should be sort of the gold standard for what this piece is. And Kyle, in looking at the scores, it's self-contradictory at times. He begins numbering sections, or he uses Roman numerals, and then he switches to Arabic numerals. I mean, they're cross out. It's a jarbled mess. And I am really, really, really glad I'm not the person who tried to figure it out. So Kyle, he took the transcription. So we have 112 minutes of what Dennis Johnson had played, and then he took these cells, these ideas, and constructed a possible way to continue through the piece. There are some loose rules for that he sort of laid out that this might go to this idea, or you might want to frame this one unit with these two. And there are some, and again, in Kyle's notes he says this, but there are some sort of structural ways that he progresses through the piece. So Kyle was able to give us a sense of what it might have been. It still, it was said to have been at least 6 hours. Kyle and Sarah Cahill performed it in Kansas City in 2009, and I think that was a little over 4.5. And personally, the closer I get to 5, the more I think I'm stretching it. I mean, as far as the material that's there. So yeah, we definitely don't have all of it or complete sense of the piece, but it is. Kyle's just done a fabulous job putting it together, and it feels really great and cohesive, and it's a real pleasure to play it.
So the piece is at least partially improvised, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of it that you are deciding on the fly. So the length of it is at least in part your decision as a performer, right?
Correct.
So what leads you to decide to make the work that long?
Well, frankly, the transcription. I mean, that's
Okay.
sort of what sets up the pacing of things. And when I first started to learn the piece, that's where I spent my time. I just wanted to get a feel for how it was that Dennis Johnson was working through the piece. And I even sort of wrote out timings, for different sections, because Kyle's gone through and labeled, how he's moving through. And some of them are quite long. He'll spend, 6 or 7 minutes on this very small idea, but particularly at the opening. And every now and then he'll just sort of, you could say flirt, he'll go back to another little idea, and maybe you only hear it for 30 seconds or something. So just to get a sense of those proportions and how he moves through the piece is sort of how I structure it. And again, it is improvisatory, but I have in my score at the end, the last 3 hours of music are like 3 pages. But so at the end of each line or so, every half hour or so, I have different timings to give me a range, just to have a very, very rough sense of how my pacing's going. But ultimately, I'll get interested in an idea and I'll linger there for a long time, or it's the third time coming back to an idea and I just don't feel like there's a whole lot more to get out of it. One thing I like to refer back to is a quote by Steve Reich, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but he had, in Piano Phase, one of his more famous works, he has a range of repeats. And it's a big range, and different recordings will have quite a variance in timing. And he was asked about that. Well, how did you come to that? And he said, after a while, you've heard what the upper resulting patterns are, the lower resulting patterns are. You've gotten the musical information you can get from it, and you move on. So there's no, magical formula I'm using or anything. I just kind of go with my gut based on what Dennis presented in the first almost 2 hours of the piece.
So one thing that strikes me listening to your recording, which by the way is fantastic,
Thank you,
is how patient both the music is and you as a performer are with these very simple ideas and really letting them. I can't imagine them spreading out any further than they are, which. I don't imagine myself having that capacity for patience in putting a piece together. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that, about how patient you have to be, not only as a performer but also as kind of a co-composer with this improvisatory part?
Sure. I mean, luckily, I'll go back to Tom Johnson's An Hour for Piano. That was the first. It was the first piece I recorded. It was the first really long piece I had ever attempted, and I've sort of, I guess, been developing my patience over time. Tom Johnson's work, in that case, is also very improvisatory. I mean, it's all written out. I'm playing all the notes that he's written, but it stems from improvisation. He was actually gigging at, I think it was at NYU for a modern dance class, and so he just had to play for the class, and he's coming up with these ideas, and it was neat. And so that was sort of my first exposure to an improvisatory quasi, long work. And so I spent a long time, because I just adored it, just developing that sense of space, and this being a few years ago. And then I'll actually point to another piece that I recorded last summer, and we'll be recording the companion piece this summer, but by Wandeweiser composer Jörg Frey, that's called Pianist Alone, and it's 90 minutes long. And I actually find, because it's extremely sparse, I mean, we're talking metronome is about 50 and a lot of whole notes. And I find that to be more difficult as far as patience and really holding on to things. I find that more difficult than November. And I think there's something about improvisation that makes that time move, or it's easy to be patient, maybe. I think the hardest point now is actually getting through those, is the second hour of the transcription. I mean, as far as patience, that's the hardest thing for me, because I'm watching the timings. I have to be very much engaged in what's going on, but when I get into the improvisation section, I can just let things move and evolve naturally, and I'm much more sort of in the moment. And so, yeah, that patience just comes naturally. My wife would probably say I'm less patient in other areas because I have to spend it all here. But aside from that,
you run out of patience practicing the piano.
Only so much to go around, yeah.
No, but and I should say that it's not a completely static work. It's not as though you're staying in the same place. And you mentioned this kind of evolution, and it does move forward in a really interesting way, kind of like you said, kind of reaching back and flirting with, I like that word, the previous sections as it moves forward. And so it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition of those two ideas, of that stasis and that patience, but also that very gradual progress through a thing, which would become one of the important hallmarks of minimalism as a whole. And there are a lot of really important minimalist ideas that are exhibited in this piece, at least again points out in this article, for the first time. So it's a really great work, and what is the reaction from audiences when they hear this? Are there a lot of people that are hearing this knowing that ghost story, or do you feel like most people are hearing this as a new thing?
I think, well, I haven't played it for very many yet. And in fact, I think, there were only 19 of us when Kyle Gann and Sarah Cahill played it, his reconstruction for the first time. And really, these next two performances I anticipate combined will be by far the most people that have ever heard it live. Even if we get a mediocre turnout at both. I think most people are coming to it with the story. And I say that because I think that's sort of what's providing some of the buzz for this, is that it is interesting. This is something that, really is, this isn't overstatement, I think. It really is rewriting the history of what minimalism was doing. This monumental work was coming, well before anything Glass or Reich was doing, on any sort of large scale. In C is probably the nearest large-scale minimalist work. And even that, and a lot of things were anticipated with this, but nobody knows it. So I think there is this interest to it. But of course, that can only sustain you for so long. If you're gonna listen for all 5 hours, the music's gonna have to be there as well. But I do think a lot of people are coming to it with the story now, or at least the story, I should say, is circulating. I don't think a lot of people knew it. I didn't, but I think that's what's sort of sparking some interest right now.
And I think that you pointed out one of the really interesting things about this is that this is a piece that predates all of these important, first pieces in minimalism, like in C. It predates in C by a few years, and it's written by. Not only is it written by a teenager, but it's also a guy that didn't continue to do this. Like, he went off and became a mathematician, and this was just like a thing he did in college with his buddies, right? Which is kind of a crazy idea that it became such an important movement in music in the United States. And it's a movement that you, Andy, have been very involved with in your performing career. Last year, when William Duckworth passed away, we were recommending a few Duckworth recordings, and one of the ones that we did recommend was your recording of the Time Curve Prelude. So you've done a lot of minimalist and kind of minimalist-adjacent music in your career. What is it about this music that is so that makes it so important to you?
Oh, sure. I like that minimalist adjacent. I've gotten to the point, I've been exploring so many different, so much of my repertoire is inspired by or has some similarities with that maybe adjacent's better. It actually was the Time Curve Preludes that really piqued my interest. I had some exposure to minimalism as an undergraduate, and I remember Paul Barnes, a pianist who's worked with Philip Glass, came to where I was studying and performed some of his Glass transcriptions. And so I had some exposure, but by and large, coming out of an undergraduate experience, my thinking of what music had been doing since 1920 was dissonant and angular and hard, and, it's Schoenberg and Boulez and Stockhausen, etc. That is totally inaccurate, but that was my impression. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate to hook up with David McIntyre, who produces and runs Irritable Hedgehog, as a graduate student. And I always tell, anytime I'm speaking to undergraduates, I always tell them, make friends with composers. Because
I appreciate you telling them that.
It's quite nice.
Yeah,
we're a friendly sort.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, what'd you say?
We're a friendly lot.
Yes, I found you to be so. But composers are going to be the ones to tell you what's going on in music that you're not going to be hearing in classes. And that's not necessarily even the fault of teachers and professors. There's a bit to cover. So if you get to know some composers, you're going to learn about some music you might not otherwise have gotten the chance to. And I was I'm backing up. I was friends with a lot of composers as undergraduates, and I sort of approached new music at the time as like vegetables. I didn't always like it, but I knew on some level it was probably going to be good for me. And so when I got to know Dave, he was anxious to have me come over and listen to stuff, and he was a great cook, so I did. And one day he played the Time Curve Preludes for me, and I'll never forget that. We went down to his basement where he had his little studio. He had gotten the score in through interlibrary loan and was really excited. And it was just a revelation to me. And there are, if you listen, there are preludes that are rather dissonant and angular, but there are just moments of just serene beauty. And I didn't know that people were doing a lot of that. So I kind of joked that the Time Curve Preludes were my gateway drug. because I was interested in that, and I approached a faculty member at UMKC where I did my graduate work and said, I want to know more about this kind of music, and so I embarked on a research project, which became a dissertation, and I'm still at it. There are so many varieties of minimalist-inspired music that I don't think I'm going to get bored anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, so in my experience, I think I had a similar experience where things that were not exactly Duckworth, but maybe like Reich were kind of the gateway drug into newer music for me when I was younger. And that kind of led me almost on a backward path back to guys that you were talking about, like Boulez and Stockhausen. Have you had an experience like that as well?
Or
have you're not taking that? You've kind of stayed there.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I've played some Schoenberg, and I really like his music. I think the backwards path is more that I went from the time for preludes, which I would describe as being pretty accessible, and I've always gotten positive reactions from audiences, into An Hour for Piano or November. It's just really extreme forms of minimalism, I'd say, is kind of where I've gone a bit.
That's a pretty. It strikes me An Hour for Piano in November. That's asking a lot of your audience.
It is. Well, and I probably wouldn't be so encouraged about November if An Hour for Piano hadn't been so well received. I've probably performed that now as many times as I've performed any piece, at least. And I've performed it I've performed it at a minimalism conference where everybody knew what was going on. And I've performed it, for, undergraduates and my, pre-college piano student, people who had never been exposed to minimalism before. And generally speaking, I was surprised by how well it was received. And now one thing Tom Johnson does is he has these program notes. I mean, it's like 6 pages of single-spaced notes that
it'll take you 5 hours to read. It's perfect.
Yeah, well, yeah, and they're really clever. I mean, it's like these program notes are designed to help you listen to the piece. If you find them distracting you from the piece, you can put them down. The notes themselves are repetitive, and I mean, it's really clever, writing. But but for whatever reason, audiences really, or at least nobody who hated it told me. But by and large, I got a lot of positive reactions. So,
do you talk to the audience about what you're gonna do and its significance, and maybe give them some help listening to it for those that didn't read the notes?
I have, and I personally really like engaging with an audience and just talking from the stage.
Yeah.
Public speaking comes easy to me, so maybe it's just easier than writing program notes.
Sure.
But I think you break that fourth wall a little bit, and actually what I found to be one of the most effective things, not necessarily even explaining what's going to happen, so much as saying why I like this piece I'm about to play. Because when I make it, part of my story, when I explain, I'm not just some weirdo who jumps up and plays for 5 hours. I explain, this is why I like it. And that at least I think diminishes a knee-jerk rejection. It's like, okay, well, he's that seems interesting, why he might like this. It's not going to guarantee they will, but it helps to engage the audience in a way that program notes or even just a description of the piece doesn't, I think.
That sounds like a great thing, like that you're preparing the audience a little bit for what's going to be this really different experience. I wonder, so how do you prepare yourself to play for 5 hours doing a piece like this?
I don't drink a lot of water beforehand.
Sure.
There is sort of a mental psyching up, I think, to know that that's going to happen. But And to be frank, I mean, even with the recording, I probably have only played it through all the way 6 times.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to find 5 hours to do that. Right. But at this point, it really is a matter of, once I hear those opening 2 notes, when I hear that minor third, I just kind of slip into the piece. So really, it's just a matter of making sure I'm not going to be really hungry, or really tired, and just go from there.
It seems like that's something we don't often consider when we're talking about music is the physical endurance. Though there's certainly plenty of cognitive endurance. There's a lot of mental endurance required of not only you, but of the audience. And it's cool that you're prepping them for that, so that you're not saying this is 5 hours of some pretty sounds. There's a path through this that you can go on as well.
Yeah, well, and with November, I mean, when I listened to Kyle and Sarah play it, we were encouraged to get up, move around, even sort of step into the lobby, if you need to. And I'm definitely going to be doing that. Here are the bathrooms, and don't, the only rule is don't snore. But really, I don't want anybody to feel like they have to be paying attention for 5 hours. I'm the only one that has to do that, and even I can't do that. My mind will wander at some point. So to try and make it like, look, this is something to experience in whatever way is easiest for you. And I think audiences respond well to that. So this is not a sit down and plug in sort of experience.
Right. That's. I think that's an interesting way to frame it. It is a fundamentally different experience than sitting through a Beethoven symphony.
Right.
Sure.
And I think Nate and I had this experience last year. We went to see one of the live performances of Einstein on the Beach in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And
I'm very envious.
Oh, it was fantastic. And I'm not a big fan of a lot of Glass or any recording of Einstein that I've heard, but seeing it live was a completely different thing. I literally went into it expecting not to like it. I can't.
That's a bold move, expecting not to like it and jumping in for 4.5 hours anyway.
Well, so
it's eating your vegetables, like you said.
Right. And I expected to be coming and going as is encouraged for Einstein, and I sat there and watched the whole darn thing and didn't get up once. And I was not alone in that, I think.
Right.
So it's interesting that you're framing it as a different thing, because that's how I feel about Einstein. Is that it's not the same experience as going to see the first act of Tosca and then going out to the lobby to have a glass of Chardonnay.
Right. Yeah, it's something that you can leave it for a little while, and
it's not going to go very far while you're gone.
yeah. Oh, look, it's right where I left it. But you don't have. I mean, even with shorter minimalist pieces, I guess by shorter I mean 15, 20 minutes.
Right. Ones that fit on a CD, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a sense, and this is one of the things I love about it, of music sort of washing over you in some respects, because of the way it behaves, and there are a lot of different ways minimalist music behaves, but because of that, you are allowed to hear different things. Let's go back to piano phase. There's no one thing you're supposed to be hearing at any particular iteration. You might notice a neat little pattern. Somebody else might notice something entirely different, and that's okay. You're not being sort of pushed and pulled through the piece. You're allowed to approach it. A great analogy I've heard about this is sort of like looking at a statue. There's no one right way to look at a statue. You might not even see the whole thing. And most of us wouldn't. You're not going to go all the way around top and bottom and examine, but you can look up close, you can stand back, and no one's going to argue that you haven't seen the statue. And that's, I think that's what allows that experience to occur.
Well, and I think because this occurs in time, the analogy that I was thinking of is actually like spending time with a person. Yeah. Because this is something that is changing over time. it's the kind of thing. I mean, again, it's not the same as hearing a piece that's shorter than this or another style of music that. In another way, it's like, you know, spending time with a person and that you're improvising parts of it, and it's going to change from night to night, right? It's an interesting thing because you can let your mind wander and you can step away from it, and it's still there doing kind of similar things. Something that is mentioned in this Gann article, and you touched on briefly, is that there are kind of rules or structures, maybe instructions on how to work your way through this material. Mm-hmm. So there's almost like a personality written into the piece of, you know, the piece tends to do these things, but it doesn't always do these things, right?
Sure. And and I don't, when I perform, I don't improvise necessarily the order. You know, I mean, Kyle's laid that out, and I'm still at the point where I'm not ready to find my own way through the piece. But yeah, there are a couple of cells, don't tell Kyle, that I've sort of crossed out that, you know, I didn't quite want to do it that way, and you know, and there are times, and I will linger. I will find this interesting one time and maybe not so much the next. And so, yeah, I mean, the personality, the piece is there, but there's a lot that can happen in the moment.
So tell people, Andy, where they can hear this.
Well, you can go to, the easiest place is irritablehedgehog.com. That's the record label that's produced my CDs, and right now we're streaming the first disc, so you can hear about the first 70 minutes of it. That's streaming quality, but yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And then where can they hear it live?
Oh, yes. Well, even more important.
Yeah.
I will be performing this in London this coming Saturday on March 9th at Cafe Oto. And then the following week on March 16th at Issue Project Room in New York.
Great. And are those dates on your website as well?
They are, which is randrewlee.com.
Excellent. So we're going to come back at the end of the show and listen to a little bit of that first disc that is streaming at Irritable Hedgehog.
You could just put it on and we'll talk over.
Not a bad idea.
That seems somehow disrespectful. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we could do that if you want.
No.
Okay.
People will find that more interesting than anything I say. So we'll just...
Yeah. So let's get into some of our news headlines, so to speak, this week. Headlines, maybe not the right word for most of them, but
items, sure.
we've talked on the show a few times before about Avid shutting down the Sibelius development team in the UK that's been developing Sibelius, the computer music notation software, from the beginning of its I guess in the late 80s was when this program started, but it's been shut down. The development has been moved to the Avid development group in LA, I suppose. So a lot of people are very upset about that because these are people that they've been involved with for a long time, notably Daniel Spreadbury, who is kind of the voice of that group of developers and has been interfacing with users for many years about using Sibelius, wrote a blog about Sibelius. That team, as we said, has now been picked up by Steinberg. Most of those developers who had formerly worked for Avid are now part of a group at Steinberg who makes Cubase. And they are working on a new music notation software. This was just announced recently, and they are now also back to blogging about that. So you can check that out. The blog is at blog.steinberg.net. It was originally called something else. Now it's called Making Notes. So check that out for sure. It'll be really interesting to follow that. And you can also give Daniel Spreadbury some suggestions for this new thing. They've got a lot of great ideas. They've been meeting with, they just posted this week that they were meeting with some members of the Musicians Union in the UK to talk about some things that they would like to see in applications like whatever this new Steinberg project is going to be called. As far as I know, we don't have a name for it. But it's very exciting. I'm definitely going to check it out.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any thoughts on this?
It seems like the making notes is something close to the name that they're going with, at least so far.
For the blog.
Yeah. Well,
I think they originally called it Keeping Score, and then they learned that there was there's a radio show on NPR that's trademarked in the U.S. that's called Keeping Score. So back to making notes.
But I don't know about you guys, but I'm very excited just to see what they might come up with. Even for there to be like a huge commercially available competitor for Finale and Sibelius, it's a pretty wild prospect. And in their writings so far, they've talked about like part of the thing with being able to generate a whole new piece of software in this way. They get to take all the things that they learned from the decades of doing Sibelius and not have to deal with any of the
legacy code.
Yeah, the legacy code. They can just completely start fresh and start from a whole new platform, which might let them do a whole new flexibility of things that were never possible before.
Yeah, and technology and the way people use technology and interact with their computers and their other devices has changed completely since Sibelius was first developed. Even in the 90s, when Sibelius first became kind of popular, and one of the things that they've mentioned in a couple of the blog posts so far is ways that they can get hooks into mobile applications for smartphones and tablets, which would be fantastic.
Exactly.
So I can't wait to see how they deal with those things. They did say in this most recent blog post that some of the mobile stuff is going to have to wait a little bit. That they're prioritizing the desktop stuff, but it will be very interesting to see. They've also said that they are specifically targeting this application at professionals. That there are plenty of applications out there for kind of the hobbyist amateur market, and they really want to target professionals with this new tool, which is really interesting. I don't know what that means. Sometimes when people say that, they mean things like Broadway, which has or film scores, which I think have a very different set of requirements and needs than people that are writing concert music. So I hope that it's going to be as powerful a tool as Finale and Sibelius are now, but we shall see. Speaking of these new tools, Sam, sorry, I mean to.
Oh, I just hope that it for making a score look really nice. I hope it does a better job at that. Like I know how to make a score look nice using Finale, but it's like some of the functions are so sort of enigmatic in how they're designed. It's like you have to relearn how to do it every time you're finishing a score almost.
You end up having to do the same things over and over again too.
Yes, and just sometimes, and you sometimes feel frustrated with Finale more than Sibelius that some functions, some of the newer things that these programs can do are shoehorned in on top of, like we said, all the legacy code. I'm interested to see what kind of like product integration they have with the notation side, and having that more smoothly integrate with like things like sequencing and all kinds of different things. And I think this could be a product that people who do basically commercial music that's all sample based, but sounds like an orchestra. I think that could be a good market for what this product ends up being.
Well, and I think that's something that Sibelius was starting to do with Avid, starting to get its hooks into Pro Tools. And I'm sure that maybe not in this first version, but eventually this new project from Steinberg is going to get hooks into Cubase, which is a DAW. Like, right? Is that a DAW? I haven't used it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's like Pro Tools. It does some of the same things as Pro Tools. So hopefully they will play nice together eventually as well. It's an interesting thing to think about. Speaking of these music notation things, Isaac Schenkler at New Music Box had a really interesting column this week. He was writing about a bunch of alternatives to these music notation systems, that are the most popular ones anyway, Finale and Sibelius. And there are of course, software applications that are different from those but aim to do basically the same things, and he mentions those kind of briefly at the beginning, things like MuseScore, but he also talks about some computer software that deals with notation in a fundamentally different way than Finale and Sibelius. And I think, Nate, you found some of these particularly compelling, right?
Yeah, so I've had a hobby of like doing computer music, learning languages like Max.SP, Pure Data, and getting into some harder coding stuff, playing with processing and Arduinos, and so I've learned a little bit of C++, but a lot more Java, doing things with this. And so I was really interested to see this project, Java Music Specification Language, or JMSL, and InScore, to be able to link so many of these different kinds of software using Java and have it all be output into a real-time notational system. It's pretty wild.
What do you, a real-time notational system? Whatever do you mean?
You know, I would recommend going to the article at New Music Box, because there's the write-up that he does on it is pretty in depth, and just some of the pictures of or the screenshots of using these. Like, I haven't had a very much of a chance to use this stuff yet, but one example is this piece of software they put together. It's a Max Score. It's a front end, it seems, for this JMSL, linking it with Max MSP, and it looks like you can just use it to place notes anywhere on the staff. Yeah, Dave's got it pulled up.
You're in the video. This is what it looks like.
Yeah, and I don't know. I've been working too much lately to really try digging into this, but I'm quite intrigued, because in my writing, I've from working with interactive software and audio and live musicians and having to go back and forth so much, I'm always interested in learning about new links and reworking that platform.
One thing that I thought was really interesting is this this InScore piece that is Sam, did you just put me on speaker?
No.
Okay, I'm starting to get echo from you. So anyway, this InScore piece is really interesting because it seems that the score is generated in real time. So you set up some rules, and then the screen kind of generates new things for the live performer to play. So there's this great video of a performance in this New Music Box piece. You'll see it in a little bit. She's got she's, instead of reading a piece of paper, she's reading this MacBook Pro.
It's pretty wild. Just like sight reading, I mean, kind of having to read this performance as you do it. Yeah. It's pretty.
I can't remember the name of the piece, but there's a piano piece. I wish I could. I'd never play it because it sounds so terrifying. But you're supposed to sight read 8 bars of music, and then it throws back at you what you actually played, and you have to keep playing what's on the screen. Which just sounds terrifying.
That's just cool. It's like a notational version of "I'm standing in a room."
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's exactly. No, it's like a notational version of internet trolls.
That too.
It's like, you missed a note in measure 2 on beat 3. It's supposed to be a C sharp, and you play the C natural.
And like that whole thing just keeps going around forever. So what I would do is I would screw up intentionally the first time and play something really easy.
Well, that's what I figured. I would just play something else I wanted to play, and
right.
then I'm set. But I think one of the things that would be great as notation moves forward is to make it easier for composers to develop their own style with their scores. I mean, and there are composers that do this and do it quite well, but I can only imagine it's a real pain in the ass. I mean, but to have that sort of flexibility, a lot of the scores I play are handwritten, which creates other problems. But at the same time, I feel like I'm always getting information about the music that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten. If they just draw half notes a little bit bigger, and it's all sort of on the subliminal level, but I feel like it's a more direct connection to the composer as opposed to this finale or Sibelius, standard sort of sitting between us.
So, Andy, you feel like you're getting more nuance then?
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, this is sort of a random example, but there's a piece I play by Jörg Frey, Klavierstück 2, and the middle half of the piece is I repeat a fourth 468 times. And now his scores are all handwritten, and it's very interesting because he writes. He's a Swiss composer, and he writes in very, very tiny little notes. There's very little information that's given, but one of the things he did is he wrote out 468 quarter notes of this. He wrote out, there are just 2 pages sitting, of just full of quarter notes. And that's a really random example, but that makes me wonder, okay, what kind of a composer is it that will sit down and, and that's different from copying and pasting or, another example is I play some music by a Canadian composer who recently passed away, Anne Southam. And all the scores I got of hers originally were handwritten. And then later on, I received a couple of notes, somebody had gone back and engraved them. And I looked at it, and they did a very fine job of engraving. They kept all the line breaks the same. There was a lot of work that had gone into this engraving, and I looked at it, and I just hated it. Yeah. I just didn't want to see it anymore. It felt so cold somehow compared to the handwritten score. So, where I would like to see notation programs going is to allow for ease of flexibility of really creating that, because at the end of the day, the information you guys give us is actually very little information, isn't it?
Much to both our chagrins, I think.
Right. That's such a brilliant thing, though. I hadn't thought of that as a direction that music notation software could go. I've always just kind of been resigned to that look. And
right.
Yeah.
And even just comparing different, like a Beethoven sonata, a Dover edition versus a Henley edition, and it just their own style. It just looks and feels different. There's a lot of information that we may not consciously digest from what a page looks like.
Yeah.
So shifting gears from selling printed music to selling recorded music. The IFPI has released their annual digital music report this last week. Good news in the IFPI report this year. They've been doing the report for about 10 years or so. This is the first time since 1998 that recorded music revenues have increased around the world.
Hey.
So celebration.
Yeah.
I assume this means great things for Andy's new project.
That can't be correct because pirates are ruining the recording industry and putting them out of business, aren't they?
That's what I heard.
Not according to this report, actually, which relies not on emotion but empirical data.
Snap.
Yeah. So, scientific method snaps.
I think Nate snickering says everything I had to say about that.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So, this is driven largely by digital music revenue, digital music sales in particular, but not just sales. Last year, the IFPI report mentioned that it was the first time since they started looking at it that digital music sales had beat physical music sales. That continues to be the case. And revenue from the digital side is now the thing that is pushing the recorded music industry ahead of where it had been, and it's growing. It's not just sales, it's also licensing, like streaming on Spotify, but also streaming video and things where they're licensing the music in other ways. So a really interesting development from the IFPI report. I encourage you to read the whole thing. It's up for free. And we'll have a link to that on our site, soundnotion.tv/SN. Do you guys have any thoughts on the IFPI report?
I think one thing, I mean, I know personally my my recorded music consumption has increased a lot just in the last couple of years, so maybe I helped. But I was actually thinking about this the other day, that the technology, I mean, I think we're only just starting to get to the point. To produce a really quality record, the cost of that is going down, considerably. And what's great, I mean, I think we're finally seeing the fruits of democratization of getting music out there. I'm starting to discover entire scenes of music, entire styles that I didn't even know existed before. And it's very easy now, there are different options for this, but I can stream a CD. But even more importantly, I think, is that there's a much greater feeling of supporting small artists. Because I have a more direct connection, I'm not just buying through iTunes or Amazon or something, but, right off their website, or, through something like Bandcamp, which is a bit more music producer friendly. I feel like my money's going to the artist. They can sell it to me at what prices they want. And so I'm actually consuming more and discovering a lot more music that I otherwise probably wouldn't have if I was jumping into a record store or even browsing iTunes. I think the fruits of democratization we're only just starting to see it, I think.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Things like Bandcamp, which we haven't talked about on the show very much. I don't know why. A lot of these new hip new music record labels are using Bandcamp because it's so much more friendly to the people that are producing the music, and gives them a lot more options for distribution. I know Irritable Hedgehog uses Bandcamp. We've listened to a lot of New Amsterdam music on the show, and they sell their music through New Amsterdam as well. So, or through Bandcamp as well. So something to definitely check out. And they also, another cool thing, and our friend Tim Rosenberg, who's not with us this morning, but is a big digital music format nerd, Bandcamp allows you to sell your music in a plethora of formats, including many lossless formats, which is fantastic.
I think it's worth mentioning too that I have no data to back this opinion up, but we've talked a lot about how we've talked a lot about how discovery is so much easier. Well, related to that is the impulse buy. Like, it's so easy to impulse buy something. Like, if I hear a song somewhere here, at this conference, I could pull out my phone and own it. Like, toot sweet,
Right.
And if I have to wait until I go home and walk to my record store, or even log on at home and go to Amazon, I might lose the fervor for getting that piece.
Absolutely.
But while the cacophony of the sax quartet or whatever is still on me, I can whip out my phone and it's a done deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Andy, this is related to what you were saying. Like, if I see a group playing and they're selling their CDs out by the back door, I might pay them $20 for that disc.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way I would buy something on Amazon for that much.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point. I wonder, is there a way to sell digital things? Do they sell download code cards or something?
Yeah. No, and I've bought one of those for $5 at a place too, where it was like the link to get it for free.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. If you are handing the artist money, regardless of how that's happening, that the equation is just totally different than it's been for a long, long time. And Amanda Palmer actually, in her TED Talk,
Sure.
which is, and I have mixed feelings about her, but she did make a good point, that the economics of this is shifting, in a good way, I think.
Yeah. So something that you should definitely impulse buy through Bandcamp is Andy's new recording. When does that actually come out for people to buy, Andy?
Well, you can purchase it now, and what you'll get is the download of the first disc. I anticipate, we haven't finalized exactly when it's going to be released, but we're pushing hard to have the box set ready for my gig in London this Saturday. So I imagine, so we're just sort of saying right now because it hasn't been finalized mid-March. But
Okay.
if you were to pre-order now, you get the first disc, and you'll get, once we release and start shipping, you'll get a download immediately of that. So you don't even have to wait for your CDs to arrive.
All right. Awesome. Well, let's bail on this last story. We were going to talk about the sequester and how that might affect arts in the U.S. If it's still going on next Sunday, we'll talk about it then.
I don't think you have to worry about that.
Yeah. And also, I think everybody would just stop listening if we talked about it, and nobody would hear any of your music. So we're going to skip ahead to that. We had a kind of an editorial discussion before the show started about how we were going to do this, because we can't really give you, if we gave you a 30-second sample of this piece, you would hear 2 pitches, each played twice. So we're going to give you a little bit longer sample than we normally do, probably 2 or 3 minutes worth. This is right at the beginning, and you're going to hear some of these additive processes that we were talking about earlier. Andy, do you have anything more you want to add to set this up?
Nope, I think we'll just enjoy.
All right. So this is a little bit of our guest, Andy Lee, performing his new recording of Kyle Gann's reconstruction of Dennis Johnson's November. So that was an excerpt from November by our guest, well, not by our guest, but performed by our guest, Andy Lee. It's a new recording that will be available later this month, and you can hear Andy play it live in London next Saturday, right? Oh, I lost you. Sorry.
This coming Saturday. Yeah.
Excellent. So this coming Saturday when you hear this. So it looks like we lost Nate or something. I don't know.
I'm
what happened
back,
there.
but
okay. I don't
yeah.
have your video, Nate.
Sorry. Sorry.
That's all right. So I think with that, we're gonna call it a show. Andy, thank you so much for joining us this week. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime you've got something cool like this coming up, be sure to let us know. We'd love to have you back. That's going to do it for this week's SoundNotion. Thank you to everyone who joined us live. If you would like to join us live, we usually do this show at 11 a.m. Eastern Time every Sunday, barring any schedule changes, which we always will give you a heads up on Twitter, and hopefully we'll be able to do it the week before as well. You can watch the show at soundnotion.tv/live to be a part of the show and join us in chat there. If you have any questions for our guest or about any of the things that we've talked about, you can participate in that conversation live as it's happening. If you're watching this after the fact or listening to this after the fact, you can, of course, still participate in the conversation. It continues on our site, soundnotion.tv/SN, where you can also find links to all the stories we talked about and to where you can learn more about Andy and check out this new recording on Irritable Hedgehog. You can also continue this conversation with us on Twitter or Facebook. As a group, we are at SoundNotion on Twitter. I am at Dave McDough. Nate is at a Nate Tree. Sam is at Housegoy, and Andy is at Andy Lee DMA. Is that right?
Yes.
Excellent. So you should definitely follow him. You're pretty active on the Twitter, Andy.
Twitter has been very good to me. I've made a lot of awesome connections. It's kind of networking for people who otherwise would be intimidated by walking into a room full of strangers. So it's great.
That's a great way. That's a great thing to say, because that's exactly what it is. It allows networking for people that would be socially awkward at a cocktail party.
You have no idea how awkward I can be in person.
I don't think you were awkward at all in person. Oh. I guess this is not exactly in person. Take your word for it. So anyway, you should definitely get in touch with us on those media, and we would love to continue this conversation with you there. You can subscribe to this show in the iTunes store, so be sure to do that. Get every episode automatically on your favorite podcast consuming device, and that's totally free just for you. I promised I wouldn't do this for a long time after our best of show, because I was doing it a lot at the end of last year. So it's been gone for 2 months. But if you would like to support the show, you can, as always, do so using some links on our site. Probably the easiest, most painless way to support the show is to use our Amazon search box on the right side of our site, soundnotion.tv, and you buy your random Amazon crap from there, and you won't see any difference, but we'll get a little commission from that, and that means a lot to us. So thank you so much for being a part of the show. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gulo and video by Tyler Lepp. Thanks again for watching or listening, and we will see you back next week.